So welcome everybody. Today I'd like to start by acknowledging here in Courtenay on Vancouver Island, I'm on the land of the Comox First Nation. I know that many of you are on the land of other nations, so please feel free to write those nation names in the chat. And always let us remember our connection to our siblings in these nations and to work and pray for the day in which we might be together in right relationship. So thank you for being here this morning. It's the 8th and final session of Interfaith Educator Harold Rosen's Justice Series, exploring its global development. And today we're going to be talking about global and future views of justice and world order. So over to you, Harold.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. And I gave you numbered sections of the handout, and one of them is on restorative justice. That's about number 6. And I'd like to just talk a little bit up until that section, and then I want to ask Rachel to share some of her experience and understanding with restorative justice. I feel like I'm just a baby when it comes to restorative justice. I've been aware of it for about 3 years and trying to, work with it and understand it, read about it. I'm the secretary of a little restorative justice group in Ladysmith that works with other restorative justice groups and Indigenous people. Okay, I just want to remind you the very first session, I was mentioning reasons why people would want to take a course like this and having to do with the state of the world. And as you know, things are shifting daily in terms of the global atmosphere and whether a whole new order of the world is being proposed, and are we regressing? All kinds of issues. Also, environmental things. I became very aware that any theory of justice for today has to include the earth and has to include indigenous people. It has to include a lot of other things that were previously not of immediate concern to people who thought about justice in the global context. Okay, and so today I started out with giving you two things. One is a timeline of earth care or environmentalism. And I mentioned things like, well, once upon a time, indigenous people revered Mother Earth and had something like the sacred tree, which was seen as a symbol of the bounty of the earth and the wisdom of the earth. I mentioned things like Zoroaster had animal rights. This is like 3,000 years ago. Animal rights, especially as regard to cows and horses and domesticated animals. There was something like environmental science in the early Islamic centuries. William the Conqueror had forest law. The timeline has Rachel Carson, 1962. There was a book called Silent Spring that sort of woke up North America and Europe to, chemicals and how we were destroying the environment. So that's certainly on any kind of timeline about environmentalism. Also, the Rio Earth Summit of 1992 was a big one. Kyoto Protocol of 2001, the Paris Climate Conference 2016, and the UN Climate Change Conference in Dubai just in 2023. I also put down a timeline of global population. Just want to look at that with you. It took the world until 1820 to have 1 billion people. Okay, just the first billion in 1820. Then 110 years later, we had 2 billion, 1930, 2 billion. 30 years later, we had our third billion. 14 years later, our fourth billion. Then 13 years later, our fifth billion. Then 12 years later, our sixth billion. In 2011, we had 7 billion. Now in 2022, 8 billion. Do you see the math? The number of years it takes us to get another billion are getting shorter and shorter. And they're saying 11 billion is the carrying capacity of the Earth. That is the most we could possibly have. And one of the books that I gave that in these notes is called 11, What an intriguing title. 11, what does that mean? Well, it means 11 billion, and it's all about what changes we're going to have to make for a planet with 11 billion people on it. If we get that far, I believe we will, but I'm maybe optimistic. Okay, and then I gave you some earth care teachings, and this was sort of a shock to me that there are stewardship teachings in all of the world's religions. Um, and of course, they're a major part of indigenous consciousness, indigenous awareness as well. But the one on Zoroastrianism, I have it at the bottom of page 1. It says, as the earth is created by the good Lord, we are to till the soil, tenderly care for animals, and raise prosperous families. Wow. So that goes back at least 3,000 years, that piece of guidance from Zoroastrian scripture. And there's echoes of that in all the scriptures, and I tried to summarize some of them. I gave 2 summaries of all these teachings about earth care. One of them, I put it this way: the earth and its creatures, including human beings, were all created by a power greater than us, and we should therefore show deep respect for the creation and its creator. That's one way of summarizing what the world religions are telling us about the earth. Another, I put at the bottom, near the top of page 2. Since we have been gifted with understanding of the earth and its creatures, we should use this gift to care for and beautify the earth. Anyway, these are like ways of interpreting what kind of guidance we get when we look at the world scriptures. In section 2, I mentioned the global ethic. I don't want to go into details on that, but there was a World Parliament of Religions in 1992, which was 100 years after the original one, in 1892. And a book was developed that it basically was saying, there's a lot of ethical wisdom in common to the people all over the world. And they came up with 4 what they called irrevocable directives. We should be nonviolent and respect life. We should uphold a just social order or affirm solidarity. We should be tolerant and live a life of truthfulness, and we should observe equal rights and partnership between men and women. Fascinating that they found grounds to, affirm these principles by interviewing ethicists and religious leaders from all over the world, about 200 of them. Okay, near the bottom of page 3, there's this concept called monism or universalism. So legal monism is the idea that all the laws in the world, from all the countries and all the villages and all the communities, are basically part of one system of law. That's legal universalism. I didn't know the name for that, but I believe that myself. This whole course has been trying to show how that's been developing, a concept of international law. So that would mean any international law that gets generated should apply everywhere. Anyway, now the opposite of that point of view is called legal dualism, that says laws in nations and laws for the world community are completely different. Don't compare them. They're not even apples and oranges. So it depends. There's a wide view on that, a continuum of views as to how cohesive all the laws in the world should be. All right. On page 3, I mentioned omniculturalism. I hadn't heard of this until I researched for this course, but this is an educational outlook that says when we're studying the world's peoples, we should emphasize what we have in common first, and then go into differences. Wow. So that's sort of a procedural point. Emphasize common ground and then go into differences. Wow. Because I think often it's the other way around. Differences first and then stumbling into common ground later. Okay, that makes sense to me, that angle on things. Now, section 5, I call it virtue jurisprudence as a philosophy of justice. Wow, what does all that mean? I want to tell you, I'm saving you time. 15 years of research on ethical systems in the world. If you study all the ethical systems in the world, there's basically three kinds, three main emphases. One I call, you could call it duty ethics or obligation ethics. So that is an approach associated with Immanuel Kant. You're looking for universal laws or rules, universal rules. That's the emphasis. Another approach is you're not paying attention to rules so much as results. So ethics is about producing beneficial results. You see the difference there? One, you're looking at the formal rules. The others, you're looking at the outcome of the behavior. Okay, and now here's another angle that ethics has to do with virtues or moral spiritual qualities and cultivating those qualities. So in the West, in the Western thinking, most philosophers line up on one side or the other between the first two. The emphasis on obligation or rules, or the emphasis on results or benefits. So they fall neatly into two camps. I remember when I was studying this saying, I don't think that's all there is. There's something missing here. And then I started saying, and then I realized, okay, all the religions are offering a third alternative, virtue ethics. The whole weight of the world religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the Eastern religions, they're emphasizing qualities that are to be cultivated, qualities like compassion, a sense of justice, fairness, responsibility, that kind of thing. In the West, it was women philosophers around 1950 and 1960 said something's missing from the two ethical systems that you've been paying attention to. So virtue ethics became a term, virtue ethics. Okay, I summarized some of that stuff there, bottom page 3. And virtue ethics or virtue jurisprudence, that would mean looking at the law. Yeah, look at virtue jurisprudence. I give a definition of it. The view that law should promote the development of virtuous character, and justice should cultivate excellence among citizens as well as flourishing in societies. Flourishing, cultivation. Okay, so that's another approach to ethics, law, and justice. And there's starting to be, judges that write papers on what are the qualities of a virtuous judge. And I list some of those. They have sobriety, courage, temperament, intelligence, wisdom, as defined in certain ways. Okay, so all that is a little summary of a third point of view about ethics and about law and about justice, emphasizing virtue. I love this because it's universal, right? So people all over the world have some kind of concept of virtue. They may call it something else. Maybe they call it morality, but that's a deep common ground and a good way of looking at ethical behavior. You want to cultivate it. Okay, and now I come to restorative justice, middle of page 4. I mentioned here, I'm just going to say a tiny bit, and I want to see I want to pick Rachel's experience because Rachel has been at this a while. But it looks like indigenous concepts of justice inspired something called restorative justice. And here's something way back in the middle of the 1970s. Yeah, late 1970s, I was taking a course on justice called Philosophy of Justice. And in that course, they were saying there's three kinds of justice. Retributive justice, that's where you're emphasizing punishment for crime. Distributive justice, where you're trying to distribute, the bounties of society fairly. And then restorative justice, where you're trying to heal the people involved in some sort of difficulty. So you want to bring about the best possible response to the offender and and the victim, right? You want to meet their needs as well as you can, and all the people associated with them. So you're bringing back healing or restoration to society. Wow, that's a very old point of view. You know, that goes circle justice is what we sort of summarize it. It's an indigenous way of doing things. Wow. Okay. So restorative justice might be said to be bringing justice and healing to everyone involved in a harmful offense, as opposed to colonial justice or the justice legal system many people are used to, where the victim and the offender are very detached from the whole process. They don't even have to show up. Other people decide justice rather than anyway. I'm sort of caricaturing. Sometimes the victim and the offender take the stand, but often they're quite distant from the process. Okay, Rachel, what's your experience with restorative justice? What have you done? Why did you get into it, etc.?
Yeah, so I'm also kind of a baby with restorative justice because I've only been involved for maybe a little over a year. So here in Vancouver, there's a group called Restorative City Vancouver, and they're trying to make Vancouver the first restorative city in Canada. And they've got funding, and they chose my neighborhood, which is Hastings Sunrise, to become the first restorative neighborhood. So they recruited and trained a bunch of facilitators, including myself. And we're just starting off with holding community talking circles, kind of getting people's input as to what they'd like to see in a restorative neighborhood, because restorative justice would be yes, like resolving conflicts, but also a much larger concept of how do we live in harmony? How do we create a restorative community? How do we take care of the environment? And how do we just make this a place where people feel a sense of belonging? So we're doing kind of that piece right now. And I'm actually working with to organize a interfaith one right now, but a local interfaith one. So we've got, I'm not sure exactly yet who's going to participate, but we've got a Buddhist center in the neighborhood. We've got a Sufi meditation center. We've got a Sikh Gurdwara, all in this little neighborhood, which is kind of amazing. A bunch of churches, Christian churches. We've got a Jewish woman and an Indigenous woman who are planning to participate. Yeah, go ahead, Donna.
No,
Oh,
continue. I have a question, but finish
okay.
first.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we're starting with, but then we are starting to take conflicts now as well. So there's three main organizations involved in the neighborhood locally, one of which is the Hastings Sunrise Community Policing Center. And so ideally, we're going to start getting referrals to resolve conflicts. We've actually already, I think, I haven't done any myself, but another facilitator has already started facilitating one conflict situation, and that seems to be going well. But yeah, it's very different from the usual justice system in that, as Harold mentioned, all the parties are involved. So anyone who's affected could come and sit in the circle. Everyone gets equal airtime. I think in the regular justice system, not only do offenders end up just getting punished, but victims also feel very unheard. So even if they get some sort of, say, financial piece given to them, they like end up feeling like they never got to say their piece, or they don't really experience healing through that necessarily. And so the idea is to restore harmony. How do we address the harm that's been done in a way that seems fair to everybody involved? Yeah.
You know, that's such music to my ears. Oh my goodness. Okay, Donna, please, Donna.
Well, I'm just wondering how important apology and forgiveness are in the process of restorative justice. In other words, saying, I'm sorry, and the other side saying, I forgive you. I mean, are those the dynamics of any kind of restorative justice?
No, I wouldn't say so. And that's really a great question, though, because I think The thing is, I feel like my understanding is that forgiveness and justice are two different things, and they can happen simultaneously, and that would be wonderful, but you can't really force forgiveness. So say someone's been incredibly harmed by someone and they don't feel safe in their home anymore in the neighborhood. The idea would be to, how do we create a place where this person can feel comfortable and safe in their home? It's not, does this person forgive this person who broke into their house? I mean, that's kind of a separate thing for them to work through, but it's not a requirement by any means. Yeah.
I got to share another angle on this. You know, I read a paper called Reintegrative Shaming Theory. What a mouthful. Reintegrating shaming theory. But basically what that's saying is there's you can stigmatize someone, which pushes them away, or you can say, shame on you, but you're not a bad person. I want you to be part of my family or my community or my tribe. So shaming in a reintegrative way, the research says that's good. It actually works. It decreases the odds that you'll do it again. Whereas if you stigmatize the person, label them a criminal, put them in jail, or do other, that improves the odds you will offend again. It's actually worse. It makes it worse, not even neutral. Anyway, so I believe remorse is a big factor. If someone has the slightest bit of remorse about what they did, then it's like, okay, immediately there should be some kind of restorative justice. Immediately. Let's say you burn a house, but you don't have the slightest bit of remorse. Well, then maybe you need criminal justice, right?
Well, it's also the beauty of the circle process, because even if somebody has zero remorse, when they hear how the other person has been impacted, then they start to understand the impact of
Ah,
their actions. And
okay, the
unless
remorse, it could come later. It doesn't have to be there in the beginning. Very good point. Thank you, Rachel. Oh, okay. Baxter.
Thank you, Rachel. I suspect you get a degree, greater or lesser, of pushback in the community to the application of restorative justice. Can you
What do
tell
you mean by
me?
pushback? What do you mean by pushback?
Well, I mean, human beings have a propensity for reductivism. So, for example, now I don't know what the truth is here. I'm creating an example here. You're working in restorative justice. So those of you involved in restorative justice might so focus on restorative justice by this instinct for reductivism that you think that that's all there is to justice, or
Oh, I
you
don't think that.
decide that is. But I know I'm not saying this. I'm asking, but there are people who will see the application of restorative justice as an imposition on how did Harold restorative and distributive justice, where well if all you're doing is restorative, then where's the redistribution and the retribution? And so I'm wondering, are you experiencing pushback from the community? I don't know. I was just making that up as an example of why there might be pushback.
Some people don't like restorative justice. They want the old-fashioned kind. They want to identify the victim and punish them and clear it up, and that's it. And others, you see, here's a funny thing about human beings. We can turn anything into an absolute or a religion. I know someone who thinks everything should be done by restorative justice, period, everything. And I realize vis-a-vis that view, I disagree. Sometimes I think we need criminal justice, but I think we could use restorative justice way more than we do, and it would really make a big difference. Anyway, so in other words, I'm not for any one type of justice being the last word. We need to keep learning and growing about different kinds of human problem solving. But restorative justice is an ancient form of wisdom that's coming back now. I think, you know, it shows a lot of commonality with indigenous wisdom.
And
And
I would add, yeah, thank you, Harold. But I would just add, Baxter, that the people who participate in the process all have to agree. So everyone has to want to. You can't say
yeah,
you have to resolve this restoratively. The offender has to want to do it. The victim has to want to do it. All of the people involved have to be voluntarily present. Otherwise, it won't work. And then I think this particular group, the Restorative Collective Vancouver, what they're hoping to do is have this be a sort of a frontline possibility for people. And if it's not the right thing, in each case is evaluated to see if it's something that's even suitable to restorative justice, then the criminal justice system is there as kind of a backup.
Yeah, so
another big thing I'm seeing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Baxter. Yeah.
if I may just reiterate it, so are you experiencing, is this group, are you experiencing any community pushback? Martin Luther King got pushback, and he was certainly doing a good thing. So I'm not in any way criticizing anything. I'm asking sincerely if you're experiencing pushback in the community.
Criticism. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what is their argument, I guess is what I'm asking. Thank
I
you.
would say not pushback, but a lack of understanding. People are a little confused. They're like, "What are you doing? I don't really get it." And you know, it's kind of a new thing that is evolving, and we're all kind of co-creating together. So we are having trouble kind of explaining to people why are we trying to bring these interfaith groups together to have a dialogue, you know. So we just came up with like a 2-page document that kind of lays out what we're doing that all 3 organizations agreed on. But yeah, it's less pushback and more just kind of like a little bit, I don't know who you are, I don't know what you're doing, why should I invest my time in this, a little bit of that.
Yeah,
So
Donna.
Just listening to all this interesting conversation, it occurs to me that it is probably most and more effective on a person-to-person or small group level. But would restorative justice work on a country-to-country level, for instance? I mean, how would you get to that place?
Let's save this for the rest of the course. You know, I mean, we just got to item 6. There's a bunch of stuff I want to get to later. But
Okay.
here's another, I want to give you an example. Before I knew the word restorative justice, I was a minister, and there was a big problem in my church. And 18 people were involved. So I said, okay, let's all get together and we'll pass a talking stick. Right? So this took 3.5 hours. This problem, though, had been festering for months. It was dividing the church. So in 3.5 hours, everyone spoke and as they passed the stick. And by the end of that, everyone seemed to understand exactly what went wrong and what could be done about it. So that there ended the problem. Oh my goodness. You see, that's very efficient. Also, I understand the different types of processes. It can be shuttle diplomacy between 2 people. You can go, like 2 people can go back and forth between the victim and the offender, and they never see each other face to face. That can happen. You can have them face to face with 2 or 3 people that understand them, that are part of the process. It can be 20 people involved. It can be a series of different meetings with different subsets of the people involved. Depends on how complicated it is. But the goal is some kind of healing and understanding and amending. Like, you know, the active engagement of the offender and the victim. They're actively engaged in the process. Their needs are being addressed. They get to speak. They're being drawn out. They're being understood. That's the idea as I understand it. Anything more on all this, Rachel? The fact that you're doing an interfaith version of this is such music to my ears, I can hardly stand it. That's fantastic.
yeah, I'm
Oh,
excited to be involved. Yeah.
wow. Okay, we'll circle back to the. You know, I'm going to briefly. I gave you a bunch of book reports. Not all of them are relevant. Okay, quickly. I'm looking at page 5. Yeah, look at page 5. Humankind: A Hopeful History. Bill, you brought up this book 2 weeks ago, you brought up this book. And I said, well, that happens to be in our curriculum for next week. But this guy, Rutger Bregman wrote this book a few years ago, very fascinating. But basically, he's distinguishing, he calls it Planet A and Planet B. And he says, imagine a plane crash. On Planet A, the passengers turn to their neighbors and ask if they're okay. Those needing assistance are helped out of the plane first. People are willing to give their lives even for perfect strangers. That's Planet A. Planet B, everyone is left to fend for themselves. Panic breaks out, lots of pushing and shoving. Children, the elderly, and people with disabilities are trampled underfoot. Now the question is, which planet do we live on? See, he thinks the preponderating evidence is we live on Planet A. Most people respond to crises with a lot of compassion and assistance. However, you do find some Planet B. Anyway, so he's sort of making the case of, and he looks all around, and I mentioned there, he studies prejudice. Gordon Allport spent 40 years studying prejudice, and guess what the answer to overcoming prejudice is? Contact with the people you have the prejudice about, right? You need, so there are things we know about human processes. And he collects all this data that point to a very different picture than most people have. Human beings are very cooperative overall, right? Especially if they grow up under cooperative concepts. So he's sort of, the book is sort of a tour de force, trying to rewrite how human beings understand each other. Anyway, so that's an interesting book, which has implications for how we look at justice and how we solve problems. I mentioned a book called Blessed Unrest. It's an environmental book, but it really blew me away with how it describes how there's been it's almost like the earth is taking care of itself. They say the environmental movement is like an immune system for the earth. The earth is rising up through its people to take care of itself because of the harm, of the military-industrial complex. So that's a fascinating book. Then I'm on page 6, I mentioned this book 11. I've got to tell you the basic idea of this book 11. I had never heard it put this way before. He's getting us to think about 3 things: ecocentrism, anthropocentrism, and then he comes up with a new word, human nature. It's all one word, like not 2 words, human nature. Okay, ecocentrism is sort of saying we have to take care of the earth first. It's putting environmental concerns absolutely first. Anthropocentrism is saying, well, the earth is only here for us. He puts it in a formula. So ecocentrism says we belong to nature. Anthropocentrism says we own nature. And then this thing called human nature, all one word, is we are one and interrelated with nature. And he's saying the greatest of these is that third point of view. We are integrated with nature, and we can solve the problem, with nature. We can bring about human potential and growth with nature, and we're learning enough to do it that way. And he's sort of saying the other 2 are extreme. I had never heard the issue stated this way. So, and then he says we need to re-examine the values and assumptions that determine our basic understanding of how we fit into the universe. We're integrally related. So this was new to me. And he says, evolution is full of, is a constructive process, and it's open-ended, and it really uses cooperation, not competition as much as we thought. Yeah. I wonder what Darwin is thinking for having put competition, so much into modern consciousness. And even when I think of a tennis game, you could say that's a highly competitive thing, but they're agreeing to playing by rules. They're doing each other a favor by playing with each other. So you can sort of look at human history and interaction in a very different way if you start to look at cooperation, the extent to which we're cooperating. Okay, that's another interesting book report I gave you. I want to mention a few more things only and open it up again. And we're getting to some of this world stuff that you were alluding to, Donna. Yeah, lots of development in terms of world federalism, adjustments of the UN, etc. But technocracy, you remember in this course, I've picked up certain things like, for example, fascism, social Darwinism, hypercapitalism. These are ideologies that are also theories of justice. These are somebody's view of what a just society would look like. So you have to study things like that. Now, technocracy, look at page 8 at the top. No, that's not right. 7. Where's page 7? Yeah, 7 at the top. I try to define technocracy, an ideological view that government should be conducted by decision makers selected for their technical and scientific expertise, taking ever increasing state control over political and economic issues. This to me is an ideology. By an ideology, I mean a pseudo-religion. It's a worldview that's claiming all problems can be solved in a certain way. Now, transhumanism is closely related. This is the philosophy that says what we want to do is continue and accelerate the evolution of intelligent human life beyond its currently human form and human limitations by means of science and technology. So, for example, we could, instead of aging, we could replace all our parts with brand new ones that work better than what we had before. And we would never die because we keep replacing our parts. I mean, I'm extrapolating, but I think this is part of the view of transhumanism and technocracy. These are quite strong ideologies. There's lots of books written on this stuff. And all of them use artificial intelligence, AI, which I try to give a definition of. AI is the theory and development of computer systems able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech recognition, decision-making, translation between languages. It's a tool that can be used for both beneficial and harmful purposes. Therefore, it's important to approach AI with caution and responsibility. That's my point of view. We got to use AI very carefully. We need to start having ethics surrounding it. But transhumanism and technocracy as ideologies want to use it in an unhampered way. Put no blocks on the use of AI. Anyway, I may be extreme in my characterization of this, but that's to me a view. That's a view of justice, actually. Some people say that will be the best possible society to set it up with technocrats at the helm. Okay, and then I have a section on environmental justice. I just want to read some terms. Eco-justice. This is on page 7 of my notes. Eco-justice or earth care, the practice of environmental responsibility, including sustainable economics, recycling of products, reducing pollution, preserving species, balancing the ecosystem, conserving natural beauty, and minimizing human impact on the natural order. So this is basically using all the science that we've developed over the last century or two and having the attitude of indigenous people toward the earth, right? So using that knowledge in a way that will beautify and sustain the earth and improve the odds that people's needs can be met many generations in the future. So it's hard to think about justice without bringing up the environment, animals, plants, the elemental forces that we're living in. Okay, I also mentioned things like the Universal Declaration on Indigenous Rights that happened in 2007. And the Truth and Reconciliation movement among indigenous peoples builds on the Universal Declaration. Did you realize there's like 46 articles in the Universal Declaration of Indigenous Rights? And it's, in other words, a very substantial document. And so some countries are trying to rewrite their constitutions to taking all that into account. So that's a major thing that happened, that declaration in 2007. I summarize on page 8, I believe. No. Yeah, page 8, I summarize 10 principles of what's called reconciliation. And they include using the United Nations Declaration. It's realizing there's First Nations, Inuit, and Métis all have a distinctive culture in Canada. That reconciliation is basically about healing and truth sharing. It requires constructive action. You have to respect the views of the Aboriginal elders, the knowledge keepers. That it requires trust building, political will, and investment of a lot of resources. It's not easy, and it involves everyone. Everyone is involved in truth and reconciliation process, ideally. Okay, so a lot of wisdom has emerged around that. And I just want to mention a few more things, and I'll stop again, and I'm hoping there's more comments, questions, polite complaints, etc. World federalism and global governance. You know, some of you may remember a book written called Our Global Neighborhood. It was in 1992, I believe. No, 1995, Our Global Neighborhood. So there's a lot of people that know the UN is sort of has some dysfunctionality to it, right? It cannot solve problems because of the veto power on the part of the Security Council. A lot of people, here's a big question of people who are thinking about global justice. Should you fix the UN or should you scrap the whole thing and start from scratch and build a world federalist system that it has an executive, a legislative, and a judicial function, along with some sort of force that can carry out the laws made by the people? So, you know, I realize I have a sort of position on this. I've come across a book called Global Governance and the Emergence of Global Institutions for the 21st Century, written by people with a lot of UN and global experience. And they basically say it would make more sense to sort of adapt and reform and modify the UN system than to start all over again. In other words, the United Nations and all of its subgroups have learned a great deal. And you know, many countries have taken, for example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is you know, something Eleanor Roosevelt worked on, and they've adapted their national constitutions based on it. So there's a lot of good global experience going on. There are international laws. There's an international court. Of course, it's not as strong as it could be. But they're saying we should not scrap the whole United Nations experience. We should build on it and develop a real world parliament that represents the people. Have an executive, say, of 24 people that are very carefully selected, global civil servants who have impeccable credentials that are trusted by everyone. They would make up an executive. Anyway, these are some of the thoughts going into looking at justice at the global level. I just want to say one more comment about this. Well, a few more, and then I will stop. I get carried away. You know, it makes everyone understands that if we, let's say that we have two villages that are not getting along, and they're solving their problems by fighting. Well, an alternative to that is to get those two villages together and make some laws that they agree to. So the purpose of law is to solve problems. That's the purpose of it. There was a very important book called World Peace Through World Law, written, in the late 50s. That's sort of a classic. I mentioned that in section 6 of this course. World Peace Through World Law. So that's basically saying what is commonsensical. The way to solve problems is to make rules and enforce those rules and modify those rules depending on. So when you think that way about the whole global community, yes, we have to build a structure of international law, of universal law, that has at least these three agencies, an executive, a legislative, and a judicial, along with a force and a body of a fundraising mechanism too, some kind of global tax or something. To me, all of this is like common sense, but some people say things like, "Oh, a world government would be oppressive." Then, so my question for them is, well, how are we doing without it? So in other words, if you have national sovereignty, every nation does its own thing, maybe cooperates when it's convenient to do so, like through airport procedures, and trading procedures, only cooperating to a limited degree. So anyway, I happen to believe this is the big transition humanity is going through. We're going from a global order based on national sovereignty to another kind of global order based on consultative global governance. Those are almost sacred words to me. Some kind of global governance that is truly consultative, so it can tap into the wisdom and experience of people all over the planet. Well, anyway, these are some of the ideas in the rest of the notes that I've given you. And at the very end, I gave you a whole view of human history in 3 stages. This is really good. This is worth the whole price of admission for this course, I believe. So let's call it the first great age, humanity's childhood. So I believe this childhood lasted up until about 6,000 years ago. So all of humanity's time on Earth until about 6,000 years ago, let's call that humanity's childhood. And during that time, we did everything in terms of this circle justice. Decisions were made by circles. Women had prominent roles in human societies up until about 6,000 years ago. Then I'm calling from 6,000 years ago till now, that's the second great age, humanity's adolescence. And there was sort of a patriarchal takeover. Men got into prominent decisions during that time. We conquered the earth. We did not revere the earth like we did in the first great age. We conquered the earth. And now we're coming into the third great age. We could call it humanity's maturity. So we see that, that age of humanity's adolescence, of conquering nature, that really was quite dysfunctional. And it also was a time when we were highly competitive, from culture to culture, religion to religion, to empire. So this last period of time, I'm hypothesizing, the period of time we're going into, we would have justice that flows from impartial and virtue-centered consultation, a different kind of justice system that includes the earth in its calculation. Some kind of environmental justice would be involved in that. The very last thing I gave you in the notes were prophecies from world religions, which I think point in the direction I'm describing. The prophecies are basically saying humanity will grow up. There will be peace on earth. There will be justice on earth. It uses terms like the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord. One government shall rise among men. The final restoration shall take place. In the new golden age, all shall be wakened as at the end of night. The city of righteousness in the pure land will be filled with people of all classes and lands. I'm reading you prophecies from the world's religions. I saw a new heaven and a new earth with a tree of life for the healing of the nations. Book of Revelation. Seek scripture. All humanity shall live in peace together under a shield of administrative benevolence. Baha'i writings. All people have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. Okay, here endeth the reading. So trying to just at the end here show you we're concerned with global governance in some form. What form will that take? And where's humanity going in its next stage? We're not going to be able to conquer nature anymore. We got to go forward and include nature and nurture the ecosystem. Okay, Donna, please. Yeah, Donna.
My thoughts about what how you've concluded, those three ages.
Yes.
I go back to your initial statistic about how many people on this earth. And
Yes.
it's parallel. There were only 1 billion for the first, how many thousands of years.
Yes.
And it works that way. So we are at that 11 period, that big 11, and we have to figure out a way of how to continue to be on this planet as a species. And this is the time now, because the facts, the statistics are pointing to that. So that's one thought.
Absolutely. There's
the other thought I had is about this whole thing about some world governance.
Yes.
And I don't mean this facetiously. I really mean it. The first thing that needs to be done, given what we know, what we are all experiencing today, is that the headquarters of the United Nations governance aspect has to be moved to a different country. It should not be in the New York City, USA anymore. And the final, at least, thought about all of this is it's going to be so difficult because so much of power is interconnected with economic interests, be they personal, whatever, all of the different levels. It's so tied in with who gets to be the richest and how.
I want to hear everyone else's remarks, but I've got to share an assumption behind the scenario I was sharing about human maturity is that there is something like a maturation process for humanity collectively. So that's what I'm presupposing. We actually can get wiser collectively. We can actually do that. I think evolution is evidence for that, right? So, but that's an assumption, right? So in other words, our moral spiritual caliber in the future will be higher. We will think about a wider system of needs than our own, right? We will learn to care in larger circles. We'll have a different kind of educational system. Roz, please, your hand is up.
Okay. I'm sort of interested in the generations that nurture themselves in justice. And it's not a quick solve at all. And individuals do the same thing. They hold on to the fact that they have been unjustly dealt with. So my question for anybody is, how do you address that in a way that is efficient and healing, and so people can move forward? Because most of the conflict and turmoil is that people are hanging on, countries are hanging on to what happened in the past. It was not fair, it was unjust, but they really don't have a way to remedy what happened in the past. In the future, yes, we've been looking to the future, but how do you heal people from history?
You know, that's a fantastic question. And Rachel, I'm looking at Rachel. Imagine if there were restorative justice for the whole world. In other words, these people get to share their sense of having been harmed collectively. Like every nation gets its turn. Imagine a process whereby we actually learn and hear the story of each people that feel harmed. They get heard. Oh my God, that would do a lot of healing just in itself. They get heard. Anyway, so I'm speculating, but I'm saying some kind of restorative process would be possible at the global level. We could use our resources that way. If we can make nuclear weapons and do space exploration, we can set up a technology that actually gives everyone a turn, to share. Another thing, though, required is we have to overcome ego. We have to become detached. We have to learn how to do that. So we have to start learning that as soon as we're born from enlightened parents. We have to learn that, Baha'u'llah said, avoid anger as you would a lion. Avoid anger as you would a lion. Well, what if that became common wisdom? So people learn to monitor their anger. And they say, oh, that's a bad thing. I need to solve the problem without anger. I have to substitute talking for fighting. What if that became an ordinary way of child rearing and growing up in the world and communicating with different agencies? Anyway, please, Rachel.
I just want to add something to that. I think, yes, that's important, but also just teaching emotional intelligence in general, because I think it's also very gendered, right? Women are not allowed to feel anger. Men are only allowed to feel anger and not anything else is often the case. And so I think people have different work to do in different areas with that. I think for some women, feeling anger can be very healing.
Absolutely. But how about assertiveness rather than anger? So in other words, there's a positive use of anger. You could call it righteous indignation, but done in an eloquent way that can be heard. Instead of producing more anger, you produce less by how you share it. Yeah, that can be learned. I assume that can be learned. Yeah, Donna.
Oh, anger is a, quote, normal human reaction. We're all human. We all have points of anger. Greed is not necessarily. And I think when I was listening to Roz, I was thinking about greed and how greed propels actions. But I don't think necessarily it's a natural human, it's something we learn. That's mine. The child says, that's mine, not yours, right? I want more. That whole thing. And you multiply that on a societal level and on a global level, and you have what we have today.
Another way of putting all this is to say, I don't know how much I've mentioned the virtue pill idea, but, religions essentially are offering humanity a set of virtue pills, right? And so historically, it takes about 200 or 300 years before the new religion has shaped a new society. That takes a while.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I'm assuming that humanity now needs to apply its virtues to the whole world, right? So, in other words, a larger circle. We have to be compassionate not only to our family and to our race and to our religious group or our nation, but to the whole world. So the virtues now apply universally. That's possible. Okay, I see a hand. Baxter, please.
Thank you. I'm thinking of this issue Roz raised, and I'm picturing. I always fall back on human nature, and I know in the case of a fire breaks out in a crowded room, everybody rushes to the door, and somebody might get crushed by the rush. Everybody's just thinking to get themselves safety. afterwards, standing outside, somebody may hear somebody calling for help inside and very altruistically rush back into the fire to save someone. So this altruism and human nature meet at some point. And uh, you can't really blame people for rushing out of the fire for being unaltruistic. There's just an instinct there to save yourself. Now, anyway, in that connection, somehow there's a connection here, and I'm not sure where it is. I'm thinking of restorative justice in terms of nations and, outside of personal restoration, where it works very well, I suspect. Isn't there a danger of getting so caught up in rehashing the past and apologizing and restoring individually and going on and never ever getting past all of that to the point of actually building a new world order? I put that out as a question.
It's reasonable. In other words, yeah, I asked the same thing. I know people that are sort of hooked on therapy. So you see what I mean? Yeah, the goal would be to actually get stronger and not keep milking the wounds. I think you're pointing to that possibility. I once did I didn't call it restorative justice, but 80 people were involved in a process in a church. And it took a whole weekend to get around the circle and listen to everybody. It took a long time. But on the other hand, it was highly efficient because the problem was solved. Um, so part of learning restorative justice techniques is it requires emotional maturity, right? So to not be stuck in the complaining, right? The goal is to grow through. But you're right, that can happen. You see people that get stuck in the complaining mode. So we need a type of moral spiritual education which says, okay, the complaint is valid for a while. After it's voiced, after adjustments are made, we grow through it. It becomes part of our history. That becomes sort of the understanding and the norm and the goal. But you're right. You're pointing out a lot of the dangers. We get stuck in our complaining mode, right? We get stuck there. Yeah. Okay, who hasn't spoken yet? Bill, please. Yeah.
Yeah, this is just, well, there's so many ideas that occurred to me, but one that I think is an interesting footnote to the 6,000 years. That's that 6,000 years is at the time, 6,000 years ago, is when writing actually arose and communications or there was a means of communicating between society other than just face-to-face interaction. So I think it's very interesting. We also can see now that we can evaluate ancient DNA in humans, that was also a turning point in that we see much more mixing of the many small populations that occurred in the world before 6,000 years. So it's even an important type of there's an important genetic marker associated with that. So I've always found that sort of a fascinating type of thing to realize how and on another level the interconnection of the world.
There's a thinker named Teilhard de Chardin who was a paleontologist. People might know him. Yeah, he talked about this process of planetization. So this was the humanity spreading all over the earth, right? So large chunks of humanity moved on. Large chunks stayed where they are. They were like two kinds, the settlers and the explorers. And we had both kinds. And so humanity spread all around the earth. My goodness, Yeah, makes for again, I see that as evolution. This is part of evolution, and evolution applies to moral values as well, spiritual values and ideals. All of that evolves. I think Nive has been writing some brilliant comments, and I wonder if Rachel, can you read them? Are they written down somewhere? Or Nive, you can tell us what you're saying? Yeah,
Yeah,
Rachel,
I can
yeah,
read
read some
them.
of these. Yeah.
So most recently, I think in response to the discussion about complaining and how do we heal the past, when you consider how many centuries of persecution and abuse occurred, we have to be patient in raising awareness of justice issues and then resolving them. We're not there yet when it comes to Indigenous communities or Black communities all over the world. And then
Patience.
she said,
Yeah. It's another one of those virtues. Yeah. Right. Okay.
and then
Is
want
anyone?
me to read the other
Please,
comment
oh,
about
please. Are
Shogi
there more?
Effendi?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was one more comment about Shogi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, established the administrative order of the faith in New York, not because it was a perfect model of the faith community, but because as a major metropolis of the USA, it had the potential to transform itself from its materialistic ills to spiritual enlightenment. It seems he anticipated the kinds of secular problems the nation would have due to excessive materialism. Perhaps there is still hope for a more just and functional UN there as it struggles to meet the challenges of the current age.
Okay, because Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, called New York the city of the covenant and said it would have a crucial role in the development of world peace. And of course, the United Nations is there. But Donna says it should be somewhere else. Yeah. Oh, and there are other UN offices in other places, right? Yeah, there's about 5 or 6 of them. There's one in Africa too. Anyway, Donna, please.
No, I was just going to say, I think it should be in Canada.
Okay.
Joke.
You pick a global-minded country. All right. Yeah. Mhm. All right. Oh, Bill, is your hand up? Yeah.
Yeah, I am just going back to Darwin, and I think what's gotten emphasized out of his work was this business of competition. But that's only really a small part of his work when you read the whole
I agree. I pick on
aspect of it.
social Darwinism more than Darwin. I think you're right. I'm
Yeah.
talking about what people did with Darwin more than Darwin himself. Now, I think he
Yeah.
was a great thinker and a scientist and way more nuanced. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the competition got latched upon because it was an explanation that had not occurred to many people. But a lot of the work really deals with symbiosis and cooperation and viewing all of life as not a distinct species as much as a vast, complicated web, and the interrelatedness even of species being a web. And competition was only one small part of it, because the symbiosis and changes there were often affected by forces that were outside the biological world, changes in the environment, changes in the mix of species. There's a fascinating book called, the title, I don't remember the author. The title is The Book That Changed America. And it's about the impact that Darwin's book had upon American thinkers at the time it emerged, and how, and in particular, it deals with the transcendentalists who started I think about 1840, and were predominant in American thinking throughout the rest of that century. The whole thinking of the transcendentalist was also very much identified with the abolitionists And they were certainly an important part of our history. But the book also shows the limitations of of how they were also mired in their times, because even though they were for the abolition of slavery at the time, they still viewed that there was a hierarchy of societies, and sort of white Western society got placed on the top, which goes back to our whole concept of justice. But the book is fascinating because it deals with the personalities and and how Darwin's book caused people to have to rethink their whole approach.
You know, I was a Unitarian minister, so all the stuff you're talking about, was very important to me as a Unitarian. Transcendentalist, Emerson, Thoreau. Oh my goodness. You see, I now think though in global terms. See, Emerson got a lot from Hinduism. That's part of his inspiration. He found a universal kind of spirituality in Hinduism that he kind of put in sort of North American terms and transcendentalism. I'd like humanity to draw from all parts of the world. That's my methodology. So this justice course is drawing from all parts of the world. I was trying to show you Chinese contributions to the highest thinking, Indian contributions, Middle Eastern, European, indigenous contributions. I just saw a hand up. Maybe it was Baxter. I might have made that up.
I do have,
Yeah, please.
I do have a question, if I may. No, just a thought here too, in terms of what Bill was saying, that great thinkers like Darwin. It's interesting to note in terms of racism that essentially before 1750, racism didn't exist. Carl Linnaeus came along and did that, a Dutchman who he made that chart that says this animal evolved from this animal, which evolved from that animal, and there's this classification of animal, and there's mammals, and he's the guy that built that, Carl Linnaeus. He also did that to the human race, and he split the human race into these different categories according to color. And prior to that, people didn't really judge each other according to color. There was a lot of judgment, but it was along racial or linguistic or cultural or anything else. But what color a person was didn't really account for anything. It was only after Linnaeus that those who wished to find reasons to draw lines between people said, oh, well, obviously these are different kind of human beings than these, so those guys aren't worth as much as we are.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Anyway, that's a side point, but it's important to notice that great thinkers like Darwin and Linnaeus, they bring about a consciousness which can be used to good or evil. They come up with these ideas, and it's wonderful ideas they come up with.
You know
There's
what
always
I
someone to
believe
abuse
is
them.
universal education will re-study Darwin in different terms. Same with Marx too. You know, like I basically think communism, the way it was developed by Lenin and Stalin, was a bad thing. But Marx himself said all kinds of interesting things that, it's a larger system, like Darwin. I agree with what Bill is saying. But Darwinism, I'm talking about the ism part of it, the ideology made, which was a way to control, a way to maintain your status. Yeah, that tendency, that's a human tendency. We do it with good ideas as well as with bad ideas. But universal education will bring all this to light. We need to re-look at these mountain peaks of intellectual and spiritual achievement with a universal view, right? How can they help humanity as a whole? Or how were they pre-shadowed, in earlier developments? Okay, we're running out of daylight. Thank you for. Anyone want to say anything that didn't get a Jennifer, hi, are you there? I was just talking to your friend Connie Waterman. She's a friend of Connie's, Jennifer. Okay, anything else for the good of the order? Who didn't get to? There you are in person.
There I am in person. I'm ready, you can't keep me still, so I got to move while you're talking, Yes, no, awesome, just wonderful. I've already sent the PDF out to people, and I'll be sending out the YouTube. It's just so wonderful. And yes, Connie said it was another delightful event last night. So thank you for what you do, and thank everybody for being here, because it's really mind-blowing, and I really appreciate what you've done. Thank you.
I've been on Zoom meetings in Baltimore and Washington, and I see Jennifer Ains. She found that out too. There she is. Okay, good to have you. All right, anything, Donna, your
I just
hand
have
up.
a question. You sent
Please.
us the slides. Are you going to comment on that?
Those slides, that was a quick panoramic summary of the whole course.
Mhm.
All those slides showed up somewhere in the 8 sessions that we had.
Right
That
across.
was just the one gulp of the whole course. Yeah,
Thank
you can show those slides to your friends, and now you're experts on what they mean and what they point to. In fact, there may be better slides. That was just my first attempt to kind of show people, wow, justice has been around, right? There's been many forms of it. Yeah, we've struggled to define it and apply it. And we lost some of the good stuff we had in the past. That's what the slide is supposed to show us, the slideshow. All
you.
right. Thanks again to Rachel and to Kathy Merchant and the Living Interfaith Sanctuary for making this course available. And I can't believe some of you hung in for 8 sessions. You defied the law of gravity. Most courses are not supposed to last this long of the community education variety, only 4 sessions or 6. Baxter, your hand is up again.
I'm sorry to keep interjecting here.
No, great.
Question, is this the end of Saturday morning studies? Is it
Well,
going to
this
be?
course is coming to an end. Rachel, you guys going to do anything else?
We might. We're discussing some different possibilities. So yeah, are you on our mailing list, Baxter, for the Living Interfaith Sanctuary?
Oh, I believe so. If I'm not, can you put me on it?
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. So you'll find out about anything else coming up, and you're always welcome to attend our services where we bring in speakers from different faiths.
I'm going to do another Zoom course with Kathy. It's called Women Mystics. I've done that before. We look at 8 women mystics, and are they interesting? And it's an attempt to look at world religious history in a different way, right? Through women's eyes. And women had special talents in the area of mystical awareness and writing ability. So anyway, we take 8 very important women, many of whom are not well known at all, but did amazing things. That's a course coming up in May, I think 4 Fridays in a row.
That's going to be with
It's online.
Canadian Memorial. Is that right?
Through them.
Okay.
But it's online, so people could get there from anywhere else. 1 o'clock on a Friday, going to 2.5 hours with a break, and we look at 2 women mystics in a 4-part series. Okay, anything else for the good of the order?
I got a question for you, Harold. Do you know if the United Nations, is there a mechanism within the United Nations for it to fix itself, or can it only be replaced?
Thank you. In the notes, it talks about the Commission on Global Governance. There's something called a Commission on Global Governance, and this is the UN trying to fix itself. They're talking about having a conference called a Summit of the Future. And because the problems with the UN are very well known. They're known within the UN and they're known elsewhere. It has to have a serious, something like a world parliament to replace the General Assembly. It has to have an executive council to replace what's called the Secretary General right now. In other words, you have to have 3 functions plus a force, right, and a fund that's more adequate to the needs. But all that requires human maturity. The nations have to overcome their ego, as Roz was saying, right? They got to look beyond their own nose and say, this is for the benefit of all humanity, including my part of the world. Yeah. We have to give something up and sacrifice for the benefit of humanity as a whole, including the earth. And that's urgent. Like we only have about 10 years to fix some of that damage. Okay, anything else for the good of the order? Yeah, Bill?
Well, I was just going to remark on the United Nations. Despite its problems, I think, as I think you've emphasized, it serves great purposes in terms of sort of a consciousness of the world. And it goes way beyond what you see in the headlines. All of the commissions and discussions,
World Health Organization, etc.
Yeah, they go
UNESCO.
on there. They offer so many insights, even if they can't implement the mechanisms for healing those problems. They expose many the complexity and dimensions of many of those problems.
You know, if
So
I were a rich man, I would give all my money to the UN and say, I want you to do two things with it. I want you to strengthen that Commission on Global Governance, right? And I want to strengthen also all the organizations that are providing civil service to humanity. I'm thinking especially World Health Organization and UNESCO do so much, and all of their subdivisions, right? Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Thanks for hanging in, everybody. Good to see you. Some came back. We didn't see you for a while, and then you came back. How wonderful. Yeah, good to see you, Heidi. Yeah. All right. Take care. And thanks again to the Living Interfaith Sanctuary and Rachel.